The sleek conference hall of Sterling Aerospace hummed with anticipation. 200 of Detroit's finest engineers, executives, and invited press members filled the auditorium. Their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding on stage. At the center stood Eleanor Mitchell, 35 years old, dressed in a simple white button-down shirt and faded jeans, looking utterly out of place among the suits and lab coat inside her loomed the R7000 aircraft engine, a $2 million marvel of engineering that had stumped Sterling's MIT devastated team for 3 days straight. Richard Sterling, the company's CEO, gripped the microphone with theatrical flair, his voice dripping with disdain. "This woman thinks she can join our elite engineering team. No degree, no credentials, just delusion." He tossed a wrench at Eleanor's feet, the metal clanging against the polished floor. "You have 30 minutes to fix what my best engineers couldn't fail, and you leave forever." The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. Eleanor bent down, picked up the wrench with trembling hands, a flash of old pain crossing her brown eyes, but they didn't know who she really was. What would you do in Eleanor's position? Stand your ground or walk away? Sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to reveal your true self. Share your thoughts below, and let's see if dignity can truly triumph over arrogance. Eleanor Mitchell lived in a modest apartment on Detroit's east side, where factory noise blended with the night wind through thin walls each morning. At 5 o'clock sharp, she would brew black coffee in a chipped mug and sit by the window overlooking the industrial district where she once... No, she shook her head, pushing the memories away. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who worked at the public library, shelving books and helping children with their homework. She chose simple white shirts from discount stores, wore the same pair of worn sneakers every day, and kept her brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. No jewelry adorned her fingers, no makeup graced her face. Mrs. Henderson from next door often remarked to other tenants that Eleanor seemed like such a nice woman, but there was something deeply sad about her, something broken that she carried like an invisible weight. What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that Eleanor had recently applied for a position at Sterling Aerospace, the largest aviation corporation in Michigan, not as chief engineer or senior designer positions that would have been hers by right in another life, just a basic technician role entry level, the kind fresh graduates usually filled. When asked about her qualifications during the initial interview, she had been deliberately vague: education. "I learned through hands-on experience, previous employment, various garages around Detroit, fixing cars, mostly Mark Davidson." The hiring manager had looked at her with barely concealed skepticism, wondering why a woman her age would apply for such a junior position. "You don't have any formal training, no certifications?" Eleanor had met his gaze steadily. Sometimes passion matters more than papers, but the practical test told a different story entirely. The way she diagnosed engine problems by sound alone, how her slender fingers moved across mechanical components with an intimacy that spoke of years of expertise. She had completed the assessment in half the allocated time, identifying issues that even their senior technicians had missed. Word spread quickly through Sterling's headquarters about the mysterious woman with no credentials but extraordinary skill. The whispers reached Richard Sterling himself, and his reaction was immediate and visceral. "Impossible," he had snarled during the Monday morning board meeting. "No untrained woman can outperform my MIT engineers." His pride couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it. And so this special interview had been arranged not to evaluate Eleanor's abilities, but to humiliate her publicly, to prove once and for all that technical excellence belonged exclusively to those with prestigious degrees and the right chromosomes. Eleanor knew this, had known it the moment she received the invitation. Yet she came anyway, carrying secrets that would shatter every assumption in that room. 5 years ago in Houston, Texas, the Johnson Space Center's main auditorium had glittered with camera flashes and celebration. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, just 30 years old, stood at the podium in a navy blue suit that emphasized her professional elegance. She had just been honored as the youngest chief engineer in NASA's Orion spacecraft program. History: her revolutionary propulsion system reducing fuel consumption by 40% while engaging efficiency by 60%. Dr. Mitchell hasn't just advanced our mission to Mars. NASA director announced a thunderous applause. She's redefined what's possible in aerospace engineering. Eleanor's eyes had searched the crowd for one face that mattered more than all the accolades. Daniel Walsh, her fiancé and research partner, beamed from the front row. They had developed this technology together, staying up countless nights in the lab, building their dreams alongside each other. Tomorrow they would file the joint patent, and next week they would marry in a small ceremony with their NASA family present. But that night, everything shattered like crystalline structure. Under pressure, Eleanor had returned to the lab to retrieve her personal notebook, only to find Daniel hunched over her computer, copying the entire database of classified research onto external drives. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Her voice had wavered between confusion and growing dread. He turned, without shame, without even the pretense of guilt. She should have done months ago. Lockheed Martin offered $50 million for this technology for me alone." The words hit her like physical blows. "This is our work, NASA's work. You can't just—" His laugh cut through her protests, sharp and cruel. "Our work, please, Eleanor. You think anyone believes a 30-year-old woman designed this? Your window. Dressing, sweetheart." The betrayal, cut deeper than any physical wound, could have 5 years. Together, countless shared dreams, whispered promises in the early morning hours. After breakthrough discoveries, all of it had been a lie. A calculated manipulation. Daniel had positioned himself perfectly, documenting every interaction to paint himself as the lead researcher while she appeared as merely his assistant when she tried to stop him from leaving. With the drives, he triggered a false security alert, claiming she was the one stealing classified materials. In the chaos that followed, Daniel deliberately sabotaged the lab safety systems to destroy evidence. The explosion that resulted left Eleanor with severe nerve damage in her right hand. The very hand that had sketched countless designs, built prototypes, reached for the stars. 6 months of investigation followed, but Daniel had been thorough. Falsified emails, doctored security footage, purchased testimonies from colleagues he had been cultivating for years. Eleanor found herself branded a traitor, quietly dismissed by NASA to avoid public scandal. But the deepest wound wasn't professional destruction or physical injury. It was discovering that Daniel had been recruited by Lockheed from the beginning, tasked with getting close to NASA's most promising engineer. "You were perfect," he had told her. During one of the depositions, his voice, casual as if discussing whether brilliant enough to develop what we needed, naive enough to trust completely. Her life's work now bore his name. Her dreams, crushed beneath corporate greed and calculated betrayal. The night she left Houston, Eleanor had packed away her MIT doctorate, her NASA commendations, and the engagement ring she never got to wear. Standing in her empty apartment, she made a choice. She wouldn't fight in courts that had already condemned her. She wouldn't beg for justice from a system that valued credentials over truth. She would simply disappear, become someone forgettable, someone who could find peace in anonymity. But now, 5 years later, standing in Sterling Aerospace with Daniel's stolen design staring back at her, the past and present collided with devastating force. The crowd in Sterling's auditorium grew restless with anticipation, their hunger for humiliation palpable in the recycled air. Richard Sterling strutted across the stage like a peacock, displaying its feathers, savoring every moment of what he assumed would be Eleanor's destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced with theatrical pomposity, today we witness why Sterling Aerospreads only hires the best, the credentialed, the proven, the worthy. His eyes fixed on Eleanor with predatory satisfaction. Miss Mitchell here believes she can join our elite team. No degrees, no recognized experience, just misguided confidence. The audience tittered with cruel amusement. James Morrison, head of engineering, stepped forward, his MIT class ring catching the light. Richard, this is a waste of time. Obviously, she's just another dreamer who watched too many YouTube videos. Sarah Chen, the lead engineer, added her voice to the mockery. I reviewed her application library work, fixing cars in backyard garages. This isn't where amateurs play with toys. This is where real engineers work with million-dollar technology. Her words dripped with the kind of institutional arrogance that Eleanor had once navigated back when she had the credentials to defend herself. But now, stripped of titles and degrees, she stood exposed to their collective contempt. A young engineer, barely 25, with a fresh MIT diploma, pointed at Eleanor's slightly trembling right hand. Look, she's shaking already. Probably never seen a real aircraft engine up close. The laughter crescendoed, camera phones raised to capture the spectacle. Local tech journalists scribbled notes, already composing headlines about the delusional woman who dared challenge Detroit's engineering elite. The RS-7000 has a fatal flaw. Richard continued, gesturing dramatically at the massive engine. My best engineers, all Ivy League graduates, spent 3 days searching for it. Miss Mitchell has 30 minutes. He paused for effect, letting the impossibility of the task sink in. When she fails, and she will fail, perhaps it will teach others like her to know their place. As her fingers touched the metal surface, memory crashed over her like a wave. The late nights at NASA, the joy of creation, the passion that had driven her to revolutionize space travel, and Daniel's hands covering hers as they worked a gesture she had once thought romantic, but now understood as possession, control, theft. Clocks ticking. Sarah taunted, need help finding the engine cover, or should we call a real engineer? The crowd laughed again, but Eleanor had already begun her examination. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't just similar to her Orion design, it was her design modified and corrupted by someone who didn't understand the underlying principles. The resonance frequency was wrong. The compression ratio miscalibrated at high altitude. This engine would experience catastrophic failure. Whoever had sold this design, whether Daniel directly or through corporate channels, had created a flying death trap. 20 minutes, Richard announced gleefully. I don't suppose you need instructions on which end is up. More laughter, more phones recording. But Eleanor's mind was racing through calculations, possibilities, implications. She could expose the truth, now reveal who she was, what this engine really represented. But looking at the eager faces waiting for her failure, she realized they wouldn't believe her. Not without proof, not without demonstrating abilities that no garage mechanic should possess. The young MIT graduate stepped closer, emboldened by her silence. Maybe she's praying, "Hey lady, this is engineering, not church prayers. Won't fix metal." Eleanor's hand, stilled on the engine for 5 years, she had hidden from this world, from the pain and betrayal it represented, but now faced with a corrupted version of her life's work that could kill innocent people. She had a choice to make: let pride win and walk away, or reveal the truth and risk everything she had built in her quiet life. Since 20 minutes gone, Eleanor's hands had mapped every component of the corrupted engine, her mind cataloguing each deviation from her original design. The crowd's mockery had reached a fever pitch, but she barely heard them anymore. Her right hand, damaged in the explosion Daniel had caused, cramped painfully as she worked. The nerve damage made fine motor control difficult, each precise movement a small victory against physical limitation. 10 minutes left, Richard Sterling announced with undisguised glee. It appears Miss Mitchell is finally realizing the difference between fixing a Toyota and aerospace engineering. Eleanor set down her tools and stepped back from the engine. The hall fell silent, anticipating her admission of defeat. She reached into her pocket, fingers finding the small NASA pin she always carried, its surface worn smooth from 5 years of secret handling. The inscription caught the light ad astra per aspera to the stars through difficulties in that moment, standing before 200 people who saw her as nothing. Eleanor remembered the 8-year-old girl who had watched the space shuttle launch from Cape Canaveral. That little girl had promised herself she would build the engines that carried humanity to Mars. She remembered her father's words the night before she left for MIT. Eleanor, you were born to soar. Don't let anyone clip your wings. But mostly, she remembered her team at NASA, the brilliant minds who had trusted her vision, worked beside her, believed in the future they were building together. Those people deserved better than seeing their work perverted into this dangerous counterfeit. The dream deserved better. A plus C 380, were you giving up? Sarah Chen's voice cut through her reverie, sharp with satisfaction. We don't have all day for your little performance. Eleanor looked through the conference room windows at the grey Detroit sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds was the vast universe she had once dreamed of conquering. She could walk away, now return to her quiet life at the library. Let the past remain buried, but if this engine flew and failed, if people died, because she chose silence over truth, could she live with that? Her father had taught her that integrity wasn't about being recognized for doing right. It was about doing right, especially when no one would thank you for it. 5 minutes, Richard's voice boomed. Time to admit what everyone already knows. Eleanor turned back to face them, and something in her expression made the front row step back instinctively when she spoke. Her voice carried an authority that silenced even Richard Sterling. I need a digital micro-modder and precision pressure calibration kit, Matuo and Fluke models. Specifically, the transformation in her demeanor was so sudden, so complete, that several people gasped audibly unless she continued with deadly calm. You want this engine to explode at 40,000 feet? James Morrison stammered in shock at Eleanor's sudden transformation. What did you say, explode? But Eleanor had already turned back to the engine, her movements now swift and decisive, despite her damaged hand. With practiced efficiency that spoke of years of expertise, she disassembled the pressure regulation system in 30 seconds flat, something Sterling's entire MIT team hadn't managed in 3 days. Look here, she pointed to a microscopic flaw, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. The resonance frequency is desync from the compression ratio. At cruising altitude, the pressure differential will create harmonic vibration throughout the combustion chamber, complete structural failure within minutes. Sarah Chen pushed forward, her face draining of color. That's impossible. How could you know the resonance frequency of "cuz this is a modified Orion design"? Eleanor cut her off, hands never pausing in their work. Someone copied it without understanding the fundamental principles. The compression ratio must be exactly 14.7 to 1, not 15.2 as configured here. Richard Sterling stood frozen. His Orion, the NASA Orion engine, how could you possibly? But Eleanor was already deep in the repair, her voice reciting specifications with machine-like precision, fuel injection timing, 23.7 microseconds, turbine speed, 97,300 RPM bypass ratio, 5.1 to 1. Each number was exact, impossible to know without access to classified NASA documents, or being the original designer. The audience watched in stunned silence as Eleanor recalibrated the entire system with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. The young MIT engineer who had mocked her earlier now stared with his mouth hanging open. These weren't the actions of a garage mechanic or library worker. This was mastery at the highest level, the kind that came from years of pioneering work in aerospace engineering. "Done," Eleanor announced. Setting down her tools, she initiated the test sequence, and the engine roared to life with a sound so perfectly calibrated it was almost musical. Every parameter on the diagnostic screen glowed green optimal readings across the board. "Who are you?" James Morrison's voice cracked with disbelief. Eleanor wiped her hands on a cloth, then turned to face the assembled crowd. The tremor in her damaged hand was gone, replaced by the steady confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. "I'm the person who warned NASA about this exact failure mode 5 years ago when I designed the original Orion engine." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Impossible. Sarah Chen protested, her voice rising to near hysteria. "The Orion engine was designed by Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, and she's dead disappeared. Disgraced." Eleanor's laugh held no humor, only a deep, resonating sadness. "I'm standing right here. You just couldn't see me past your assumptions." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the extensive scarring that covered her right arm, the tissue damage extending from wrist to elbow. The explosion that had ended her NASA career was written in raised white lines across her skin. Dr. Mitchell, an elderly journalist in the third row, rose shakily to his feet, his voice trembling with recognition. "Eleanor Mitchell, the prodigy who was going to take us to Mars." Eleanor nodded once, a simple confirmation that shattered 200 worlds of assumption. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed like strobing lights. Phones rang with urgent calls to editors, and Richard Sterling gripped the podium as if it were the only solid thing left in his universe. "This can't be real," he muttered, his face ash-white. The record said, "You were Daniel Walsh, reported that you had Daniel Walsh." Eleanor repeated the name like pronouncing a curse. "The man who sold my design to Lockheed Martin for $50 million. And apparently, Lockheed sold it to you, Mr. Sterling." She moved to the computer terminal, typing a few quick commands, the screen filled with the original Orion blueprints, complete with her embedded signatures in the code comments NASA 2019 peppered throughout the documentation. "This," she gestured to the screen, "is proof that your RS-7000 is an illegal copy of my work, and this," she held up her phone, displaying legal documents, "is a cease and desist from my attorneys. Sterling Aerospace is facing a $500 million patent infringement lawsuit." Richard Sterling collapsed into his chair as if his legs had been cut from beneath him, but Eleanor's next words shocked the room even more. "However, I'm not filing it." The stunned silence that followed was absolute. "I didn't come here for revenge or money. I came because I recognized my own design being corrupted into something that could kill innocent people." That's all. She looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing her words would ripple far beyond this room. 5 years ago, I let love and trust blind me to betrayal. I lost everything to one man's greed. But today, I choose not to let the past define my future. Today, I choose to fix what's broken and walk away. Eleanor moved to stand before Richard Sterling, who seemed to have aged a decade in minutes. "The engine is repaired. My consulting fee will be $1 the price of a cup of coffee, because engineering excellence shouldn't be measured by ego or gender, but by its ability to save lives." She turned to address the entire room one final time. "You want to know who I really am? I'm someone who believes talent doesn't live in diplomas hanging on walls or in the circumstances of birth. It lives in passion, dedication, and the courage to keep going when the world tells you you're not enough." The conference hall remained frozen in absolute silence as Eleanor Mitchell gathered her simple canvas bag and prepared to leave 200 people, the same engineers who had laughed at her, the executives who had schemed to humiliate her, the journalists who had come to document her failure stood like statues carved from shame and revelation. Sarah Chen was the first to break the spell, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Wait, please, I'm so sorry. What we did was unforgivable." Eleanor paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to look at the young woman who had been among her cruelest tormentors. "Sorry doesn't change what happened, Sarah, but it might change what happens next." James Morrison stepped forward, his MIT class ring suddenly feeling like a shackle on his finger. "Dr. Mitchell, please stay, Sterling. Aerospace needs someone like you. We could offer you any position, any salary. What you need," Eleanor interrupted gently, "is to change your culture, not hire me to absolve your guilt. Look around this room. How many women are on your engineering team? How many people have you rejected because they didn't graduate from the right schools or look the right way?" She gestured toward the repaired engine, its perfect hum filling the silence. "That machine doesn't care about your prejudices, neither should you." Richard Sterling finally found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "I'll make this right, whatever it takes. I'll restore your reputation, ensure everyone knows the truth, Mr. Sterling. But you can do something else. You can open doors for the next Eleanor, the one who's sitting in a garage right now, dreaming of building something extraordinary, but being told she's not enough." A young reporter raised her hand, tentatively. "Dr. Mitchell, where will you go now? Surely NASA would want." "I'm going back to the library," Eleanor said simply, "where I help children from poor neighborhoods learn about science, where an 8-year-old girl can dream about Mars without being told she's the wrong gender or the wrong class." She moved toward the exit, the crowd parting like a biblical sea, creating a path for the woman they had tried to destroy at the door. Eleanor turned one final time, her silhouette framed by the afternoon light streaming through the glass. "Someone once called me decorative window, dressing pretty but useless, but every flower has thorns, and sometimes those thorns are necessary to protect the beauty within." She left then, walking out into the Detroit afternoon, leaving behind a room full of people struggling to reconcile their assumptions with reality. Sarah Chen sank into a chair, tears flowing freely now as she stared at her hands, the same hands that had pointed and mocked at a legend she hadn't recognized. James Morrison removed his MIT diploma from the wall, looking at it as if seeing for the first time how little it truly meant without humanity behind it. Richard Sterling stood alone on the stage beside the $2 million engine, saved by a woman he deemed unworthy, his empire of arrogance crumbling around him. The elderly journalist who had recognized Eleanor wrote the final lines in his notebook with a shaking hand. "Today I witnessed the loudest silence I've ever heard, the moment when dignity defeats arrogance without raising its voice outside." Eleanor Mitchell disappeared into the Detroit crowd just as she had vanished from Houston 5 years ago, but this time she wasn't running from anything. She had found herself again in the most unlikely place, not in accolades or recognition, but in the simple act of doing what was right despite those who would drag her down. Monday would find her back at the library, helping young minds discover the wonders of science, planting seeds of dreams in hearts that society might otherwise overlook, and somewhere among those children might be the next revolutionary, the next dreamer who would change the world if only someone believed in them. Some battles are won, not with power, but with dignity intact. Eleanor had chosen not to destroy those who had tried to humiliate her, not to wield her knowledge as a weapon of revenge. Instead, she had demonstrated something far more powerful, the strength to rise above, to fix what was broken, and to walk away with grace in a world that often mistakes cruelty for strength and credentials for capability. She had shown that true power lies in knowing who you are, regardless of who others think you should be. If you were in her place, surrounded by those who tried to break you, would you have chosen forgiveness over revenge? Would you have fixed what was broken and walked away? Or would you have used your moment of triumph to crush those who had wronged you? The choice, like Eleanor's story, speaks to who we truly are.